Hey everybody, and welcome. This is insane. We have Tiffany Perkinz on the stream here today. We've been going through my election guide for the Texas state primaries. So we have all of our elections for all over the state of Texas at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And it is looking like you're frozen, Tiffany. Can you talk for me? Hopefully being live didn't mess up the bit rate too much. Are you there? Uh-oh. We're already breaking things. Test. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think I froze
I got
for a
you.
second. Now good.
You're good. Excellent. Tiffany is here. She's running for Texas State Board of Education, which is just a monumentally important thing. So thank you so much for being here, Tiffany. Thank you so much for coming on the stream. This is so gracious and unnecessary, but you are an awesome candidate, which is why I reached out to you. You really are working for progressive values in Texas public education. And I think that that's really important. So I'm really honored to have the opportunity to talk with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
First off, right off the bat, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of your background, and why you decided to run for State Board of Education?
Yeah. So, well, welcome everyone. I'm Tiffany Perkins. I live in Groves, Texas. If you don't know, that's a little town in Jefferson County, about 20 minutes from Beaumont, 90 minutes from Houston. And so that is right there in District 7, which encompasses Jefferson, Orange, Hardin, surrounding East Texas areas, and then also some Fort Bend, Galveston. Brazoria County are the kind of bigger ones. But yeah, so a little bit about me. I am a career educator and I'm a mom of 6. So those are my 2 things that are most important to me. My kids are between the ages of 15 and 10 months old. So I have 4 kids who are, I know.
That's crazy. 6 kids, 15 to 10 months.
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
that's too many kids.
I had my first when I was. I had my first at 21, and now I'm 36. So yeah, no more though. Now I'm
okay. Good.
Yeah,
because 6 is too many.
Yeah, it is a lot. But I will say that one thing that has given me experiences is that I have 4 kids in public school and 2 who will be in public school whenever they're older. We did attend private school for a while, so I kind of have both sides of that, and I can tell you why things like vouchers are not going to work because it's expensive beyond just tuition, but we'll get into that later. But beyond being a mom of public school kids, I'm also a career educator. So I have been in the classroom for 12 years, alternating. I've taught at 4 different schools, 2 private, 2 public, all grades between 7th through 12th. And I've taught all styles of learners from general education, AP students, dual credit, with in conjunction with Lamar University, and then also students who are very newly arrived to the country and don't know much English yet. So I have an ESL certification, and then 7th through 12th. Yeah, so education has always been my thing. I like to call it my vocation. It's my calling. I think it's important, and that's ultimately why I'm running. I started paying attention to, so I left the classroom to work from home because it allowed me more flexibility with my family. So I actually own a tutoring business now. I use the platform OutSchool. So OutSchool is where teachers can offer their classes or services. So I do one-on-one tutoring and some group classes there, which, like I said, allows me better flexibility for my little ones. And so once I had that more time, outside of the classroom, I started really paying attention to what was going on in Texas with the State Board of Education. And I started seeing some things that were happening, decisions that were being made, not by educators, and that were driven by ideology instead of by the idea that we want academic rigor and honest education. The first thing that I noticed that really caught my eye was the social studies revamp. And we can get more into that later, but basically it restructures the social studies curriculum in a way that is very Texas-centric, Texas-focused, increasing Texas history at the expense of global history, world cultures. They want to do away with that. And then I started looking, okay, so the people who are making these decisions and who are inviting panelists to advise on these decisions, first of all, they're not educators, and the panelists they're inviting have an agenda. Many of them are Christian nationalists.
David Barton.
David Barton, exactly.
Julie Pickering is crazy inviting David Barton, who is like, an insane Christian nationalist historian.
And he had one of his books, historian, because I think one of his books, it was either him or another one, but I think it was him, that had one of his books like denounced by actual
Thomas
experts.
Jefferson and his lies. And
That
the publication company had to pull it from shelves because of how many historical inaccuracies were in it.
And this is the person that the incumbent of District 7 has invited to give insight on what millions of Texas children learn. Now, I'm not a social studies expert. I love history. I always say if I wasn't an English teacher, I would be a social studies teacher. I love it when I teach literature and I can get into the historical background. So sometimes they connect. But I would invite panelists in who are historians, who are experts in that field. And that's not it. But the expertise isn't the point, right? The point is advancing Christian nationalism into our schools, into our laws. And that's ultimately what I'm running to be a guardrail against. Put educators back in charge of education, put academics first and not ideology, and to try to stop this growing advancement of Christian nationalism that we're seeing not just in the state of Texas, but nationwide.
Man, yeah. And ideological indoctrination in Texas public schools is an insane issue, locally. You on your TikTok, there's a pinned comment in the chat. Also, chat is so funny because they're trying to be nice because we have guests on, and so they're like chatting like they're bots. Like, wow, you have experience with almost every type of education. Clap, clap. Like, but hey, thank you so much for being here and being supportive. We're gonna ask questions about from chat. We're gonna ask Tiffany, excuse me. Your last names, Perkins and Pickering are so close that I confuse them all the time in my brain.
Oh yeah, I've had somebody else kind of say the same thing. So I always remind people just Perkins with a Z, because it was funny whenever the different counties were getting ready to put my name on the ballot. They have to proofread everything, and they were like asking each other, are we sure it's Perkins with a Z? And that's not a That's funny. And so that's what my handles are, Perkins with a Z. So.
Right. If you put your questions in the chat, we're going to get to some of those questions at the end of the night around like 8:00 ish. But in the chat is a pinned comment that has a link to both Tiffany's campaign website. I highly advise that you go check that out. That is the reason why I DM'd Tiffany and was like, please come on the stream, because your issues page is so well detailed and written, and that's such a breath of fresh air as you're trying to research all of these different candidates.
Yeah.
And Tiffany's TikTok is linked in that pinned comment as well. And I bring that up to say another one of your big issues here recently has been the reading list. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So my particular area of expertise is English. So while, like I just said, I'm not a social studies expertise that I thought would get panelists, I am on this one. So I've been an English teacher for 12 years. And let me just back up and first say what the proposed literary works list is, what it's doing. So you all, everybody watching probably remembers going to high school, middle school, and they would have books that they would read during the grades, not necessarily maybe the teacher chose, but the district chose, right? And traditionally, local school districts decide what novels all of our 9th graders read, all of our 10th graders read. Some districts might give that freedom to the teacher, and that's that district's choice, but most districts kind of collaborate with the curriculum director and the teacher, but the point is that it's local. It's a decision locally made, right? So what the proposed literary works list would do, and we say proposed because right now it's just a draft and it hasn't been passed. And actually, they had so much public opposition, they wound up delaying the preliminary vote. So they voted to delay the vote, which now that would be the April meeting. So mark your calendar is April 6th through 10th. You want to go to public testimony on that, or email your SBOE reps. But cool. What the proposed literary works list is a prescribed curriculum of reading lists for every grade, K through 12, that would these would be implemented as part of the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge in Schools. So what that means is that teachers would not have the opportunity, they wouldn't have the time to teach anything else but that list. So it's in such a way that it's basically a full curriculum, and teachers so if it's in the TEKS, you have to teach it. You're going to be tested on it. And so they have to teach that list. Now, there was a House bill that was passed in the last legislature session that said that one book per grade level. That's like, for example, let's say To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know if that's the one, but let's just use that as an example. Every 10th grader in the state of Texas reads To Kill a Mockingbird, one book. But then the teachers would then choose, because you usually read more than one novel a year. But they went beyond one. They made a full curriculum of books for every grade level, K through 12. And the reason why this is problematic, there's a few reasons why this is problematic. The first reason, the one that's been most covered in the news, is that it's Bible infused. So there are passages from the, and I specify Protestant translations of the Bible because, for example, I'm Catholic. That's not my version of the Bible. And I know there's lots of Catholic, families that would say the same thing. Yeah. They're pushing not just Christianity, but a particular version of Christianity. And that's where we get Christianity versus Christian nationalism. But so it's Bible infused. Then it's not diverse at all. And I know that that's become like a scary word for them, but the reality is that representation does matter. We are a very diverse state. And so, for example, one high school teacher that testified before the board said, you're asking kids with this list that they have proposed, you're asking kids to go through 9th through 12th grade, having not read a single book by a Hispanic author in Texas. Like, how do you in Texas? Yikes. And then 11th grade, which is the year they read American Lit, no women and one non-white person in American literature. That's insanity. But it's also intentional, right? Because hand in hand with Christian nationalism is kind of a patriarchal version of American exceptionalism. And it's a package deal, and that's what they're trying to push through. So but the issue that I really want to focus on, and that I think that people across political spectrums, especially if they're teachers in the classroom, can resonate with, that this is an issue because it takes away local control. So like I said, traditionally, individual school districts determined the reading list for 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, et cetera. Now, House bill was passed saying that there needs to be one common state required work. They went further and did a full curriculum. So that would mean that a classroom in El Paso, a classroom in Beaumont, Texas, a classroom in Corpus Christi, Texarkana, these are all very different. I mean, Texas is big, geographically diverse. They're not the same needs. And so instead of the community determining the books that would be best for their students, or the teacher who knows the students determining the books, it's centralized in Austin.
Yikes. The
state of Texas says you have to read in 9th grade all of these books. Yikes. And that's big government. yeah. And you've made the point in your TikTok videos that, how diverse Texas is, the needs in El Paso are completely different from the educational needs of, the Hardin County schools, small rural schools in Hardin County. And so to have that level of unilateral conformity to a specific curriculum like that is designed, just in Austin for everybody, that's a really frustrating level of lack of control that school districts have. It's definitely state overreach. I think that's something that across the political spectrum we can connect on, which is that we need to keep control at the local level. So the job of the State Board of Education is to create broad academic standards. For example, they need to know foreshadowing, simile, symbolism. They need to know how to draft a persuasive argument. These are just examples. They're broad, right? Yeah. And then it's up to the local districts to decide how they teach those standards. And that is where community comes in, and knowing your students, and et cetera. For sure. And this removes all that.
Bringing up the way that curriculum is designed makes me think, as I was trying to make the election guide to try to describe what the State Board of Education is, which the acronym is SBOE. We might refer to it as SBOE at some point tonight. That means State Board of Education. Yeah. I found it confusing about what exactly the SBOE's job is, because I know that like the Texas legislature can pass bills that mandate how education happens in Texas, and the TEA is like the administrative agency that facilitates education that happens in Texas. And so I don't understand how the SBOE really fits into that, and what direct levers of power you would have access to if you were elected to the SBOE. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah. So basically the TEA is the governing body. And so that's the one that's kind of like the enforcement agency, right? So that's the one that would enforce that teachers are administering the STAR test on the dates that they're supposed to and that they're following all the guidelines. Make sure that schools, their test scores, they always track all that, right? The TEA is also responsible for knowing like if a school is underperforming, and then we've seen those state takeovers, things like that. So they're enforcing basically what the SBOE puts into place with regard to curriculum, if you want to think of it that way. So there's three main jobs of the SBOE. Writing the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, we abbreviate it TEKS, and that's what every student in each grade and each subject is required to learn. So for example, when I taught ninth grade English, I paid attention to the English 1 TEKS. But if you're a kindergarten teacher, you're paying attention to your grade level, but multiple subjects. So writing the TEKS, and then drafting them, revising them as that comes up. Adopting textbooks. Now, if the SBOE adopts a textbook or chooses to adopt a textbook, then what that means is not that school districts have to choose that textbook, but they are allowed to with public funds. So basically, they approve textbooks, and then schools, individual districts decide which they want to choose from what is approved, if that makes sense. So writing the TEKS, adopting textbooks, and then the third thing is the permanent school fund, which gets a little tricky with regard to what is allowed to be used there versus, because a lot of school budgeting things comes from the Texas legislature. So there's some overlap there. There's a lot of working alongside the Texas legislature. And then a lot of the SBOE also is a platform for advocating for educational issues. So when it is an issue that is in the Texas legislature, then the SBOE has a voice. Like, for example, the 10 Commandments in classrooms. That was passed by the Texas legislature, SB 10.
Right.
But the board members that oppose it, because it is a educational related issue, could like put out a statement saying we oppose this. So it kind of carries some weight,
authority,
some voice.
Yeah. You have power and influence, maybe not direct, control over what kind of legislation is passed in the legislature, but your voice is listened to and respected because you are on the SBOE. That makes sense.
It becomes a platform, essentially. Yeah. But the three biggest, if people can remember, is writing the TEKS, which is what all students learn, the textbooks, and the permanent school fund.
Yeah, the permanent school fund, is that like you're actually setting guidelines on how the budget for public schools are made? I don't understand what that is exactly.
Yeah, so the permanent school fund, some of it is set up by some of school budgeting issues is the Texas legislature. But it would make a difference with regard, especially to teacher pay. I know that's been a big issue, is teachers wanting higher pay. Also, TRS, it's not just current teachers, active teachers, but teachers who are retired and who are receiving retirement from TRS that hasn't kept up with inflation. Inflation.
Right.
Sorry. But yeah, it hasn't kept up with that. And so that's something that the permanent school fund could influence. A lot of it is based on this money exists, and then kind of discussing how it would be used in conjunction with the Texas legislature.
Gotcha. So if you have some say over, over curriculum and textbooks that are adopted, and if you have some say over the way that the budget gets designed, what level of authority would you have over like private schools in Texas? The SBOE oversees public schools. Would you have any authority at all over like private or charter schools?
Private schools, no.
Okay.
Charter schools, so indirectly with charter schools. So the TEA is the governing body. So they're the ones that have direct oversight over charter schools. However, the SBOE sets the curriculum standards that ideally, if you're receiving public funds, which charter schools do, then there needs to be alignment with charters, like with the guidelines. Now, we're not always seeing that happen with charter schools. So the SBOE can kind of be a watchdog. And also making sure to set guardrails in place that charter schools would then be required to adhere to these same standards. So that then when TEA goes in and does oversight, that they're holding them to the same standards, the charter schools, the same standards that public schools are held to. What we're seeing a lot of now is charter schools that aren't held to the same academic standards. And then we've actually had professors that have said that, like, for example, Dana Walker, who is running for SBOE 8, our neighbor in Houston. She is an instructor and at a college in Houston. I don't remember which one, but she said that she has students that come often from charter schools that are not prepared for that first year of college. And so that's an example of how it's kind of all connected. So even though the SBOE doesn't directly influence charter schools, because that oversight comes from the TEA, there is indirect influence, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So would you have, vouchers, the applications, went live to be able for people to be able to apply for vouchers now. And it's just been a Republican agenda since the 90s to increase privatization of education in the state of Texas. If you don't really oversee private schools, would you have any ability or authority to curb that trend towards privatization?
We could create guardrails in place within the SBOE that strengthens public schools, which can kind of be a defense mechanism against Abbott's attempt, like you said, to privatize education, which I agree that is ultimately the goal with these charters. The charter system, not charter, I'm sorry, with vouchers. The voucher system is kind of actually, it's borrowing the same framework that we saw after Brown v. the Board of Education, which is that a lot of people, the Supreme Court ruled that public schools could not desegregate, and they ruled that public schools must desegregate. Yeah. Right. And so the people that did not want to desegregate could then go to private schools, because at this point, before the Civil Rights Act, they were still able to segregate.
No.
So they, so anyway, they started getting vouchers and stuff for private schools. And there was actually a county in Virginia that in that time period didn't have any public schools because it was all privatized. And bringing that back here, I do think that is ultimately the agenda. We see that with the TEA state takeovers, and that the goal isn't to fix the district. It's ultimately to promote, okay, well, if you don't want to go to the public school district because the state took it over, then here's some various private and charter school options, and here's some money for which to do that. And it effectively dismantles it. So what the SBOE can do is promote guidelines and guardrails in place that would strengthen public education, that would advocate for it, and kind of like what we said, like kind of the megaphone, right, of the position of SBA. And ensure that if you're receiving state funds, then you do have to abide by these guidelines that we passed. It's not like a loophole. Yeah. And in doing that and strengthening the public schools, we're able to, again, not directly, because that's a legislature issue to overturn the voucher program. We would have to have a majority in the state Senate and state House, but it would be an indirect.
But you would have like a level of authority to, at the very least, advocate in a authoritative setting. This is not something that should continue happening to our public schools, for sure.
Yes, yeah,
and so, it is. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what we really need is make sure that we have people on the State Board of Education who are advocates for public education and who are working to strengthen and not undermine our public schools.
That's what's crazy about Julie Pickering. Julie Pickering homeschools, right? And is on the board of directors of like multiple different private school facilities. Like, has just been vocal about her goal to continue working towards the privatization of education in Texas, while overseeing public school education. I don't understand that.
And the agenda there is to get on these governing boards so that they can further that agenda of undermining public schools and pushing toward privatization. There's Evelyn Brooks is not running for re-election. I forget her district number. Someone maybe can look that up. But Evelyn Brooks is, I think it's 14, is not running for re-election. The Republican that is attempting to, there's no primaries. One Republican, one Democrat.
Yeah, District 14.
Yeah, her husband is a House representative and is very vocally anti-public schools. And now
Yeah.
I've heard people tell me that they're kind of they're wanting to form like a dynasty, kind of like how the Paxtons, their husband and wife, you know.
Love that.
But yeah, we're seeing that anti-public school. Brandon Hall up in Dallas, very anti-public school. He's a pastor and calls himself an education reformer. And he's kind of Julie Pickering's BFF on the board, right? And yeah, like, so the goal is their agenda is to get into these governing bodies and undermine public education and help facilitate its dismantling. And so that's why my passion, my goal, and why I'm running is to get educators back in the room and back in charge of education.
Yeah, it is scary to see, especially in the past, the issue of prioritizing private school funding has definitely finds its roots in the anti-integration segregationist movements. Not necessarily that like private schools are working to like be segregated necessarily today by race, but certainly like that is a big incentivizing motivating factor for people. Private school institutions is, we don't like that. I come from a private school background, actually. Was raised and graduated from private school. And my private school taught that the earth was created in 6,000 years ago in 6 literal days. And so we don't like that you teach, that godless evolution in public school. And so therefore we want to be able to teach our kids this way. Like there is ideological segregation, which is, I mean, you can make an argument for, my child, my student has these particular needs, educational needs, and this is my philosophy, and creating a market for that. And so I can kind of understand the existence of private schools and understand why people would want a private school over a public school. But then I don't understand the impulse to, if you're fighting for greater privatization of education, if you're fighting for more private schools, why then come into the public school system and mandate ideological conformity? Like the whole point of the private school is to have your own ideology over there. Why then come over here into the public school system and mandate the 10 commandments be in every classroom and mandate that Bible passages? Yeah.
Well, it's, I don't know how many people have heard of the 7 Mountain Mandate. I grew up actually, I grew up Baptist, which is kind of like a First Baptist, so not as extreme as some of these non-denominational groups, but it does have that evangelical. So, and then I became Catholic as an adult, so I've kind of seen both sides of the Christian extremes, I guess you could say. And the 7 Mountain Mandate basically is the idea that they want to dominate all aspects of society for Christ. So basically, instead of following Christ's example, they're using Christ to dominate. And education is one of the 7 mountains of society. It's right off the top of my head, I can't think of all 7, but I know law and government is one, education is one, the arts and the media is one. But education, it's all by design because their goal is to push education or push Christian nationalism into all aspects of society. And so that's why we're also seeing there are PACs in Texas dedicated to getting MAGA Trump Republicans. That's what they call themselves. I've seen the branding, MAGA Trump Republicans on school boards. And thankful, and that's like the Moms for Liberty crowd. Now, thankfully, in 2024, we saw that being defeated in a lot of places, but for example, Conroe ISD in 2024, they boasted an all MAGA school board. And there was a picture of them. They were all women. So it was like the first all women school board, but also the first like all MAGAs, and they had red hats and everything in their picture. And it was a celebration. And then you go and look at their campaign finance reports, and they all are funded by the same few PACs. And these are PACs that support charter schools, anti-public education. And one thing that MAGA has done well is that they understand that local races matter because that is the foundation that holds up everything else. So when we're really angry about the governor, president, and things on top, well, it's held up by these smaller local races. So you fill the school boards with Christian nationalists. Now you're able to advance that agenda. And then you fill the State Board of Education with people with that agenda. And so that's what we're seeing, and they're moving very quickly. And that's why I say that this particular State Board of Education election, not just mine in District 7, but across Texas, like if anyone's listening to this that are in other places of Texas, find out who's running for State Board of Education in your area and support the Democratic candidate, because that is the agenda. That is the goal, to infiltrate our education system with Christian nationalism.
Yeah, which is it's scary, and it's been scary how effective people of that ideology have been in bending the public school education system to their ideology. I will say, District 7 covers a pretty broad swath. It goes like all the way up into like the Lufkin area and all the way down like past Galveston into Brazoria County. There's a lot of more rural areas. You go all the way up in like Hardin County, Tyler County, Jasper County. There's a lot of more rural areas in District 7 with a lot more people who might, identify themselves more with a conservative ideology. And I know that a lot of policies of the Republican administration right now have been really frustrating for a lot of Americans, including many, Republicans, many more conservative people. And so they might be frustrated by somebody like Julie Pickering, who is self-avowed, MAGA, posting pictures with Donald Trump on her campaign website. People might be frustrated by that level of like ideological leaning at the State Board of Education level, but may not feel super comfortable. They might hear you talk about, the segregationist history of the private school movement, or might hear you talk about how, Greg Abbott's voucher program is bad for public schools, and might feel like, you're just a crazy liberal and you're not actually going to represent them. So what would you say to constituents who are worried about maybe not being represented if you are elected as SBOE?
Yeah. So what I would say that as a common ground that we can find amongst people who are traditional Republicans, traditional conservatives, before Trump entered this political sphere, if we're just looking at, the traditional Republican values, it's small government, right? And and I'll go back to the voucher program in a second, but with regard to small government, that's always been like Texas values. It's always been Republican conservative values. And what we're seeing take place now is an undermining of these local ISDs. And these local communities who, like you said, are very different. Some of them are more bigger urban cities, but then we have very rural areas. And things like the literary works list and the school choice voucher program, all of these are undermining local control and centralizing it in Austin, big government. A lot of Republicans and Democrats who I have talked to, especially who are teachers and especially who are in rural areas, are not happy with the school choice voucher program because they understand that it takes money away from the public schools and funds these private schools who are then just going to raise their tuition prices. So really, it's just a coupon for people who are already affording it. But like I talked to some people that are like in Hardin County, for example, there's not really a viable private school, charter school. Maybe I don't know specifically about Hardin County, but many of these rural areas, there's not like within 40 minutes or more, there's not a viable choice. So they're having to pay tax dollars. And this we get into fiscal conservatism, right? Because they're having to pay tax dollars for this voucher program that they can never benefit from. And so I've had some of them saying, if we continue to disenfranchise public schools by draining them of resources to fund the voucher program, where does that leave our rural kids? Are they just going to be asked to go work in the fields, work in the factories? And there is historical alignment for that, right? Not in America, in our history across the world, you see frameworks, you see dynamics where the wealthy have access to education and the working class, which is most of us in Texas are just, basic working class, working people. And that's something we can all agree on, Republicans and Democrats, that things are expensive right now. And that just leaves them without an education. Ultimately, if this end goal Greg Abbott's disenfranchising and privatizing education, that would leave many rural people without options to go to school. And like we said in the past, that leaves them quitting school at a young age to go to work. And so I think that's something we can all kind of find common ground on.
Yeah, for sure. And education is obviously such an important aspect of public education, but people don't consider the ways that, especially in rural communities, people rely on the services of public schools, like lunch programs, like, for the child care, being able to send your kid to school so that you can work all day. Having to pay for those things is just not within the affordability range of most people in a lot of rural areas.
So my kids actually attended private school for a little while because I taught at a private Catholic school in Beaumont for a little bit. And I can say, and I did have a pretty hefty discount because I worked there. But even with that discount, and so let's pretend that discount is the equivalent to a voucher, because the voucher is not going to cover all of tuition.
Right.
As someone who's paid it, I can tell you that it's not going to cover all of it, especially if some of these institutions raise their prices, which they very well might. But I can tell you that just from having kids in private school on a discount, it's not just tuition that's expensive. In public school, you might pay an athletic fee, but the school works with you if you can't afford it. They kind of give you all year and this, that, and it's significantly cheaper. You have your athletic fee, you have your Chromebook fee, you have your, I had to pay a $300 per student curriculum fee at the beginning of the year. That covers textbooks and everything, because they don't have any government funding. So,
right.
You're paying for all that. The lunches were about $6 a day. There's no free breakfast or lunch program. And then then there's all sorts of things that add up each grade level. Like they take a very expensive 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C., which was a great experience. But again, it's just these things that add up, right? Yeah. And if you in these communities, if you can't afford the 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C., you're an outsider. In public school, it's common for kids to not be able to afford something, right? Like, not that they won't still be embarrassed about it, but they have people, right?
Yeah.
These private schools are built to serve wealthy people, and that's not going to change under a voucher program. So, yeah.
For sure. I have a couple of friends and family who are educators in public school right now. And I have several questions from them. I'm just going to get to one of those because I want to get to some questions here from chat, because there's some interesting ones in there. But one of the main question that I really appreciated from the questions that I got from these public school educators is, at my sister's school, they have a TIA program, which is teacher incentive allotment. And so what that does is they gauge like the level of learning that a student is at, at the beginning of a time period, and then they test the level of learning that student is at the end of the time period. And if the student demonstrates academic growth during that time period, the teacher gets like good marks or is judged well, but even like might be able to get like a monetary bonus. And that feels like such a healthier way of measuring quality of education than just a flat, star test, like standardized test format. That I really like that program, and I know that a lot of teachers at her school really like that program. One, do you know about this program? And two, what do you think about the future of that program? I know that securing funding for it is difficult sometimes.
Yeah. So I was reading up a little bit about this program not too long ago, and because the districts I taught at didn't have it, but I think this is a great program, especially like you said, because it allows for growth because you mentioned the STAR test and everything. But another thing that I've seen with regard to moving up and making more money in the profession is the teacher to administrator pipeline, because really the only way to make more money is to become an administrator.
Yeah.
Not all teachers need to be administrators. Those are two different jobs. And
I used to work at the post office, and which is an insane place to work. And that's so true at the post office too. It's funny that like the parallel between the government job, where there's so many postal people who like the worst carriers are the ones who are always looking to become the administrators. And because they were always so bad at carrying, now they are the person that gets to tell you how to do your job that they couldn't whenever they were, the carrier or whatever.
And they only
that's
have
funny.
to be, and they only have to be in there for like, say, for example, for teachers, I guess it's 5 years. They might have changed it, but so we'll have to fact check that. But for the point is, they only have to be in the classroom for a certain amount of years before they're able to do the administrator program. And so now they're overseeing teachers who have many more years. But that in itself is not necessarily the problem. It's just that there are people who feel like they need to provide for their families, and the teacher salary isn't cutting it. So the next step is to become an administrator. But they were actually great teachers, great in the classroom, not so great as an administrator. And look, I can even point to myself. I have a principal certification, but I found that I prefer being in the classroom than being a principal of a school. Like that's just me. Like, and there's a lot of people that I think would benefit, therefore, from this type of TIA program where they don't have to leave the classroom to make more money. And so I would definitely support its expansion. I know that it is at the district level, so districts have to apply to the TEA to be part of it. And one thing that I would point out is that the districts that are able to apply to it are often districts that have on hand, for example, grant writers and great lawyers, because it is an extensive process to get this like on the books, right? And so some of these more lower income districts, especially in rural areas, might not have the means or the support in order to implement this program in their local area. And I think that's one way that the SBOE can champion this program is by making sure that it is what is the word, equitably available to all schools,
100%.
all demographics, and it's not like that makes sense.
That more funding could go towards schools that can afford it less, so that schools that can definitely afford it, that balance is a lot more, like you said, equitable. That would be good. And like I said, I know that they really enjoy the program, but that it can be really complicated to implement. They got a new superintendent, and that superintendent had a lot of success at their previous district. And so they implemented it here, but they have somebody that has to be dedicated to like all of the admin work for actually measuring it all and plugging in the formulas to see if growth is happening. And so I know that it can be complicated and can be an expensive program, but I know that teachers have really appreciated it.
Yeah, so I think that we definitely need to help districts have support to implement it. And that's something that I would like to do from SBOE. So. Cool.
You want to get to some questions from chat?
Yeah,
we've got, like I said, we got several good ones in here, but the first one that I have to jump on is about the TEA takeover of Beaumont. I live in the Beaumont area and have seen the way. I also work with the Houston DSA in Houston, and they've had big campaigns against the TEA takeover of Houston ISD, and how frustrating that has been for them, and how really kind of in the Houston example, it seems very politically motivated by the people on the ground. That Houston is a far more kind of liberal area, and so Republican administrations like Greg Abbott's are trying to like clamp down on those areas by taking over their school districts, which just removes actual like democratic control. Your school board members are elected by the people, and they're pushed to the side so that the state can come in and administer your district. Yeah. Now, for the Beaumont ISD takeover, we've struggled with, frustrating performance from Beaumont ISD for a while now. And so I don't know how warranted or unwarranted it is necessarily. I know that I am frustrated by the undemocratic nature of a state takeover of school districts. Can you talk a little bit about what those state takeovers are like, and maybe some of the pros or cons for them, and how you might work to make those healthier on the SBOE, if you have any authority to be able to do that at all?
Yeah. Like you said, a state takeover is pretty alarming because it is essentially, well, not essentially, it is the removal from office of duly elected community people. I mean, imagine any other situation where, like, let's say these people in Congress, all of a sudden, they just are removed, right? Like, imagine any other situation where we remove duly elected people and then brought in the state governor appointees. Now, on paper, a state takeover is supposed to improve academic performance. So a state takeover can be there's two main reasons that can trigger a state takeover. It can be academic performance or severe mismanagement. We saw that in Beaumont ISD in the past. I think it was 2015, 2016, somewhere thereabout.
In the ancient times.
Yeah, it feels like so long ago. And in that case, there was some severe mismanagement of funds, and TEA temporarily took over. Of course, that was under a different TEA commissioner and a different political landscape. But I'm using that as contrast to what we're seeing now, is that so a state takeover is supposed to be the nuclear option. That's what it's called. And that's for like when all other things have been exhausted. I attended the Beaumont ISD meeting with a representative from TEA, and it was in the auditorium. There was a very passionate community members, and they were asking him questions. And what I gathered is that there had been growth demonstrated on paper between 2024, 2025, 2026. And so even though it wasn't growth that met their standards, there was growth happening. It wasn't getting worse. The schools that were failing, there was only 2, and both of them had been in the past taken over by a charter company. So they should have been excluded from consideration with regard to, if you have a school that's failing, you can be taken over. Those should have been excluded from that because they were already taken over in the sense of a charter school. And people asked that, and the guy didn't give really a solid answer. There was a lot of dancing around questions with that. And so, yeah, like you said, what we're seeing is, I think that the goal is not to, even though on paper the goal is to improve academic performance, and it would be good if that were the case, but I think that more so the case is furthering this agenda of dismantling public schools, because then, the state has taken, let's look at Houston ISD a year ago. They removed libraries and turned them into detention centers. They were really putting an iron fist down on discipline issues, and they were lowering teacher morale. They had a very prescriptive curriculum that they had to teach that left absolutely no room for teacher flexibility, teacher autonomy. There was a teacher started leaving en masse. I mean, it didn't do anything to help, but then you have all these charter and private schools popping up in Houston, and Greg Abbott, who's saying, oh, it's okay if TEA took over your district and it's not a good place for your kids to go to school. You can go to this charter school, this private school. And that's the point, right?
Yeah.
And so then we see that you're absolutely right. We're seeing it happen more often in school districts where the majority population is Black or brown and Democrat elected, Beaumont ISD. Houston ISD, Fort Worth ISD was another one, right off the top of my head. And again, the problem is, so lower teacher morale. Oh, and then another thing I need to definitely point out about this is, so when they remove the duly elected school board, the governor appoints a conservator. For example, that's Andrew Kim, a former superintendent elsewhere. Now, this person who's a conservator is a conservator over multiple districts, and they're getting paid an hourly rate per day that if they were to work 40 hours a week, which they insist that they're not, but they're at other districts. But if they were to work 40 hours a week, their pay is $500,000 a year. And the Beaumont ISD taxpayers foot that bill. Yeah, because that was asked at the meeting, who's paying for that? And the guy basically said all the different words until they said, so the taxpayers are paying for it. And there's no way, there's a direct question. So Beaumont ISD taxpayer, but it gets worse because Beaumont ISD taxpayers are paying for the conservator's salary. Then the conservator installs, because I use that loaded word because it's not community input, chooses a board of directors who is from the local community, but the local community has no say in who.
Yeah, they're not elected.
Chooses. Yeah. And then they choose a superintendent. The superintendent also gets a salary. So Beaumont ISD is now paying the salary of a conservator and a superintendent. Someone asked, will the teachers' pay go up, the people who are actually in the classroom? And that, of course, was a no.
Of course.
So, I mean, that's going to be a district level thing. And
right.
Then they have a timeline, like you can graduate from this takeover if you are at these places at the end of a 2-year mark and a 3-year mark. And so people kept asking, well, what if we're not? This was the Beaumont meeting. Well, what if we're not? And so he would say, well, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you are, but what if we're not? Because again, some of these issues you can be the best teacher in the world, but if there are extreme poverty happening at home, all these underlying issues, like, it's not going to fix it. And certainly not somebody who doesn't know the local community is not going to be better situated to fix it than Dr. Allen from Beaumont ISD, grew up in this community. But so they kept asking that question. Well, what if it's not? And the ultimate answer was that the state can stay indefinitely if it's not.
Indefinitely, as in forever.
That's what he said without saying, because people kept asking, what if it's not? Well, what if it's not? So so there is a timeline, but there's no situation for.
Is the standard that has to be met? Is that something that's decided beforehand and the district has to work to that level? Or is it just until the DEA decides whatever arbitrary standard, okay, now you're at the good enough level where we'll leave. Can they just keep on moving that goalpost and stay here forever?
On paper, no. On paper, they can't move the goalpost. There is you need to have these particular scores in math. I mean, it's all about the STAR test ultimately. When we say scores, we're talking about STAR.
Gotcha.
These scores in math, these scores in ELR. Now, there are on paper guidelines, but I don't know if there are particular guardrails in place or how trustworthy the guardrails are that they won't move the goalposts.
Because they can take over a school district if just one school is continuing to fail.
And that's what happened with Beaumont ISD, but it was a charter school that had already been taken over. And that was what one parent asked, why are you coming to take over when you failed this school? Because this was your charter school. And he was like, well, those aren't ordinary charter schools. They're different. And then it was,
okay. Well, we're not an ordinary district, so you don't have to come take us over. That's crazy.
And then one more thing while we're on this topic, this one gets me fired up. I'm sorry. So remember I said that the options for taking over a school, or the things that can trigger a TEA takeover, are academic performance, and which is mostly what they cite, and mismanagement, which is what we saw about 10 years ago in Beaumont ISD, the mismanagement of funds. Well, the student walkouts up in Austin, of course, there were student walkouts all over the state, but Greg Abbott now has said that it can be triggered, a TEA takeover of and he was using Austin ISD as an example, if it's found that educators are collaborating with students on these walkouts.
Yikes.
And then he has them investigating teachers. So there's nowhere written where it says that can be one of the two triggers of a takeover.
Yikes.
It's academic performance and mismanagement of funds. But now he's basically weaponizing. If you don't do what I say, or if I think the educators are because educators are a scapegoat in this political landscape. If I think the educator is too liberal or is pushing a political ideology, never mind him trying to put Turning Point USA in every school. Right.
Or Julie Pickering trying to put PragerU in Texas public schools.
Even though that was not even the SBOE, didn't even decide that. She was just speaking out of turn. Yeah. So every accusation is a confession. But so now we're weaponizing. We're weaponizing school takeovers. Do what I say, or we're going to take over. And I think that is just more evidence of the ultimate goal. Now, the SBOE can't necessarily affect school takeovers. That's TEA, but there can be the SBOE can put things in place that maybe can make it harder for them to justify it on paper. For example, standards that aren't totally reliant on the STAR test. Is there growth-based instead of score-based, for example. Like I said, Beaumont ISD was showing improvement. They didn't reach their standards, but they were still showing upward mobility, and they still took it over. They still went with the nuclear option. So maybe if the SBOE changed some of those guidelines, then
because the SBOE can set policy that then the TEA has to abide by.
Yeah. So then making it harder ultimately for them too. So it wouldn't help the districts that have already been taken over, but it would help in a future case of government overreach.
Cool. So. Tiffany, I want to be respectful of your time. I said that we would wrap up at 8:00. Do you have time for one more question?
I do, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Let's do one more question from the chat because I have another one that kind of ties into some of the things that we've been talking about. Somebody in the chat asked, can anything be done to help schools better assist differently abled students? I feel like a lot of parents choose private school in order to ensure their kids are well taken care of in that regard. And so what level of authority would you have on the SBOE to provide better levels of care for differently abled students, for SPED students. And not only that, can you talk a little bit about the ways that the school voucher program is kind of making things worse for SPED students?
Yeah. So one thing about private schools and probably charter schools also, but for sure private schools who are now receiving this voucher money, this government money, is that they can curate their student population. They don't necessarily have to take students if they don't have existing infrastructure or resources to meet a certain student's needs. And so the Texas Constitution says that, every student, public funded education, right? And so they are required by law to abide by these, which it comes from the U.S. Department of Education, 504 plans and all of these accommodations to help differently abled students, to help SPED learners. Private schools do not. And so that's where it gets to be a problem with the voucher program, because they are going to be SPED students are going to be the first who suffer from this program, because we're pulling money out of public schools and giving it to schools who do not have to follow the same laws, like anti-discrimination laws, who do not have to accommodate for disabled students, SPED students, right? And then, we talked about earlier, people were worrying about, what's going to happen to our rural students if there's no reliable public education students. Same thing for differently abled students, right? Like what happened in our history, in our past, they were institutionalized or didn't go to school, kind of hidden away, right? And I honestly wouldn't put it past this administration, who is kind of following in the footsteps of the Trump administration, to want that to be the case, right? And so one thing, so championing public schools and making sure that they have the resources to support SPED students is going to be key here, because they're going to be the first ones to suffer from this voucher program. And let's see, I know there was another part to your question, and I want to make sure I covered all of it. So what you asked about, what was the other?
Just that, and you kind of answered it, just that some parents might choose a private school because, a private school locally nearby them is more specialized in taking care of students with their, kids, either different ableness or disability. And so what can be done in public schools to ensure that more resources are being dedicated to SPED education?
And one thing I would also bring up that I should have is that a lot of students, like you might be mentioning, they might put their kid in private school because they aren't required to pass the STAR test to graduate there. And I agree that is a big issue, because I've seen it not so much with SPED, but with ESL, because I have an ESL certification. I taught ESL, and they had to take the exact same STAR test that all the other kids had to take. They had some accommodations, and as do SPED students, like they might be allowed to do it in small groups. They might have it, be allowed to have it orally read to them instead of reading off the computer. Like there are accommodations, but at the end of the day, they're taking the exact same test that gen ed students are taking, despite the fact that their instruction throughout the year has been tailored to their needs. And so then then they have to pass the STAR test. There's 5 STAR tests in high school, and they have to pass at least 2 or 3, I think 3 to graduate, or they have to go before a graduation committee, which is basically school administrators, counselors, and teachers. I've served on some of these committees when I taught, saying, yes, this person can graduate despite not having passed all the STAR tests. It's kind of like a checkbox.
And that's so frustrating that like a special education student that might be learning at like the 2nd grade level on a daily basis, but is placed in the 5th grade, then whenever STAR rolls around has to pass at the 5th grade level. Like that's, and those numbers, if a certain, some school districts are just 2 or 3 schools are really small, especially in rural areas. Whenever you have a lot of your special education students there and they're being forced to be tested at a level that they're not equipped to handle, then a school starts failing, and that might warrant the TEA coming in and taking over your district, which can be really a frustrating experience.
Yeah. And so that's one thing that SBOE can do, is affect change in the sense of pushing TEA to align accountability with what students are actually learning in the classroom in accordance with the test, and also focusing more on growth rather than just an arbitrary STAR score. So that would ultimately help sped students in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Tiffany, thank you so much. Everybody in the chat, thank Tiffany for being here. You're such an insane person for showing up on this little tiny stream and spending so much time with us talking about this important issue. But I am so excited to get to go out and vote for you. And if you go to her campaign website, it's pinned in the comments. It's the actual website itself. I can't remember the actual URL. It's easy to remember. Texas for Tiffany 7. That's right. .org. If you go there, it's pinned in the chat. You can either donate to Tiffany's campaign or you can sign up to volunteer for Tiffany's campaign. And I know that you're planning a lot more ground game kind of operations once early voting kind of gets into the swing, not next week, but the next.
Yes, February 17th.
So we're definitely going to need people to help Tiffany out because we're going to get you elected. Like I said, the political winds have shifted so much. You see all these really left-leaning candidates picking up seats where you never thought that they would be able to before. And Julie Pickering won her last election, by 10 points, which is, it's kind of a lot, but it's not insurmountable, certainly. And with as great,
not as many,
and with as great as you are on the issues, and as far as the political winds have shifted, like I said, I think that you got a really good, solid chance here. This is a really competitive primary. There's 4 other people also running for this district seat on the SBOE. So it's going to be super, super important that y'all go out and vote in the Democratic primary and make sure you vote for Tiffany Perkinz for SBOE.
Oh, sorry, not to interrupt, but one thing I wanted to just throw in there that would be helpful is during people that are at polling locations, they're allowed to stand a certain amount away from the and just kind of pass out things or tell people. That's something that would be really helpful because there are a lot of polling locations. I think Fort Bend County alone has over dozens. There's a lot.
Goodness.
So if somebody would like to volunteer to kind of just be outside their local polling locations, I can get you materials, campaign literature that you can hand out that day. So that would be something that would be really helpful. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. As long as you're not handing water to people, because that's election interference, obviously.
Is it? Okay, wow. That is insane.
You saw they passed that law that you're not allowed to pass out water at polling location lines.
I actually didn't see that.
It's crazy. Yes.
Bring your own water or just die or go home and not vote.
Right, yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Go vote for Tiffany Perkinz. Early voting starts on February 17th, and then Election Day is March 3rd. So really important dates. Put them in your calendar. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.